ethical fading? Can you define ethical fading? So if you would, just take a minute or so to answer the poll question on the screen. How many people do we have? 9. Okay. So according to the poll, 40% have heard of ethical fading, while 60% have not. So after this training, we hope to change that. So I would like to start out by showing you a short video here in just a minute. So while watching the video, I want you to count the number of passes that the team in the white shirt makes to one another. You must be attentive and take into account both the air passes and the bounce passes.
How many passes did you count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla?
So this video illustrates an experiment called the Invisible Gorilla Experiment that was conducted in 1996. The original experiment results concluded that 58% of the people were so focused on counting the passes that they failed to see the gorilla. Whenever this experiment has been repeated, the percentage of surprise is more or less the same. So the first time the invisible gorilla experiment was conducted and all subsequent ones, most of those who participated and didn't notice the presence of the gorilla were amazed at how clear it was. It seemed impossible to them that they had overlooked something so obvious. So this experiment actually won the IG Nobel Prize, and that prize is given to 10 individuals for unusual trivial achievements in scientific research that first make people laugh and then make them think. So why are so many people blind to such an obvious image in the video? That's the big question that comes out of this. So it's also striking that so many people refuse to accept that their eyes and perception are deceiving them. They think they're seeing everything correctly, and yet they haven't seen something so obvious. So that brings us into the concept of ethical fading. What is ethical fading? Ethical fading occurs when we become so focused on one element of a problem or situation that it's all too easy for us not to see other factors that may be important. This happens when people focus heavily on one aspect of a decision, such as profitability or winning. People tend to see what they're looking for, and if they're not looking for an ethical issue, they may miss it altogether. The subconscious works in various ways. People have a tendency to predict that they will act in accordance with their values and act as they believe they should. At the time of the decision, however, the ethical considerations may have faded away and the want self often prevails. Afterwards, when people analyze their decisions in hindsight, they have a tendency to rationalize actions and believe that they have acted ethically, even though the reality may have been different. Ford. The Pinto began to see trouble with its design in the early 1970s when rear-end collisions with the lightweight car caused the fuel tank to explode and the car to burn up. Ford managers experienced ethical fading, seeing not an ethical issue but purely a financial one. They concluded it was cheaper to pay any legal fees arising from the fault than bothering to correct the design. The result was customer deaths, and Ford ended up on the wrong side of serious fines, huge recall costs, legal damages, and a big dent in its reputation. Another example is General Motors. An almost identical situation of ethical fading arose 3 decades later at GM in 2005 when they decided not to change defective ignition switches in 2.6 million cars, which turned off the engine airbags and brakes at a high speed. The defective ignition switches was eventually linked to the deaths of at least 13 people. It was estimated it would have added about $1 to the cost of each car to fix the faulty ignition switch, according to an internal GM document provided to U.S. congressional investigators. Again, GM managers succumbed to ethical fading, seeing the situation only as a financial one. It took a whole decade for GM to finally admit it had acted wrongly, and in 2015 agreed to pay a fine of $900 million and suffered significant reputational damage. And the last example we have is the NASA Challenger Space Shuttle. In 1986, NASA's Challenger shuttle exploded shortly after blastoff. Subsequent reports cited repeated quality control warnings from internal engineers and others, yet the launch was not postponed or called off. Management was ultimately deemed responsible for poor decisions that led to the death of all astronauts on board. All decisions, big and small, are susceptible to ethical fading. A variety of factors can contribute or hinder this, such as a company's culture or an individual's ethical awareness. Being fully aware of blind spots before taking action helps people make more ethical decisions, leading to personal and professional prestige. Now we're going to watch a short video that illustrates this concept.
In the book he wrote about his crimes, disgraced lobbyist Jack Abramoff, Casino Jack, asked, "What was I thinking?" This is a familiar refrain among white-collar criminals. Why can they see their ethical failings in retrospect, but not earlier when it really mattered? Part of the explanation is what Professors Ann Tenbrunzel and David Messick call ethical fading.
Sometimes situations happen and we got to think in our feet, so we go with our gut. Our instinct will tell us sometimes to benefit ourselves instead of looking on behalf of the greater picture.
Imagine that you work for a company in internal audit, and your boss asks you to inappropriately massage some earnings numbers.
You the man.
And it happens to be the week that the company is deciding whom to lay off in the most recent round of cutbacks. And you want to keep your job, of course. It is possible that you will not even notice the ethical dimensions of the action you have just been asked to take by your boss. These ethical dimensions may just fade from view. Ethical decisions are often made almost automatically by the parts of our brain that process emotions. Only later do our cognitive processes kick in. When we think we are reasoning to an ethical conclusion, often all we are really doing is searching for rationalizations to support the decision that we have already made instinctively.
Whenever I make decisions, even if they aren't totally ethical, I can still rationalize it that way.
Everyone believes we're a good person, therefore we try to keep that image throughout our lives.
As time distances us from the decision we have made, the ethical issues may start to reappear. We may feel the need to reduce the cognitive dissonance that results from the conflict between our view of ourselves as ethical people and the unethical action that we have committed. Studies show that offering people an opportunity to wash their hands after behaving immorally is often enough to restore their self-image. There's a reason we talk about starting with a clean slate.
We make a decision and then we look back on it and we second guess it. And then, you call up your best friend on the phone at midnight and be like, tell me what I did was right. You don't have to think about the real ramifications of that because you've told yourself it's okay.
Even if our minds cannot cause an ethical issue to fade from view, a process known as moral disengagement can mitigate the sting of an unethical decision. Moral disengagement is a process by which our brain enables us to turn off our usual ethical standards when we feel the psychological need to do so, just like we turn off a TV when a show comes on that makes us uncomfortable. Studies show, for example, that people who want to buy an article of clothing that they know was manufactured with child labor will suddenly view child labor as less of a societal problem than they thought before.
Cute.
Moral disengagement allows us to suspend our personal codes of ethics, yet continue to view ourselves as ethical people.
I'm a filmmaker, and when we have to do any sort of shots that are dangerous, like a car chase scene or a fight scene, you're required to have a stunt coordinator on hand. I suppose it's all of our responsibility to speak up and say, this is not safe unless we have a professional here. These things are justified little by little, of like, well, sure, it's a car chase, but we're not going that fast. Or, but they've done car chases in movies in the past, so really they're experienced.
There is no easy cure for ethical fading and moral disengagement. Our only option is to be vigilant in looking out for ethical issues and equally circumspect in monitoring our own actions and rationalizations.
Reminding yourself what your true ethical values are and surrounding yourself with the people that you think match those values.
I think it's helpful to have an honest confidant.
When you face an unethical decision, that you realize the decision you're making and you actually sit down and think about it rather than just making the decision not even realizing that you're about to do something unethical.
Being unethical does happen. Even though it's not wanted, it does happen, and to talk through it.
Sometimes you don't like to hear it, which is why you need to have someone close to you who can be like, I know you don't want to hear this, but you're making a bad decision.
Any comments they would like to make or questions? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dawn.
So you received a case study with the training imitation on Crow and the Watergate scandal. I'll give a brief overview of that, and then we'll have some discussion on it. So Eigel Crow was a young lawyer who worked for the Nixon administration in the late 1960s and early 1970s as deputy assistant to the president. Military analyst Daniel Ellsberg leaked the Pentagon Papers, which contained sensitive information regarding the United States' progress in the Vietnam War. President Nixon himself tasked Crow with stopping leaks of top-secret information. Nixon's assistant for domestic affairs, John Ehrlichman, instructed Crow to investigate and discredit Ellsberg, telling Crow that the leak was damaging to national security. Crow and another staffer assembled a covert team that became known as the Plumbers due to their mandate to stop leaks. They were broadly supervised by Ehrlichman. In September 1971, the Plumbers' first break-in was at the office of Ellsberg's psychiatrist. They were looking for documents that would discredit Ellsberg based on mental health. Reflecting on the meeting in which the break-in was proposed and approved, Crow later wrote, "I listened intently. At no time did I or anyone else there question whether the operation was necessary, legal, or moral. Convinced that we were responding legitimately to a national security crisis, we focused instead on the operational details, who would do what, when, and where. The break-in, which was illegal, was also unproductive. Nothing was found to discredit Ellsberg." Crow later pled guilty to his role in the break-in and was sentenced to 2 to 6 years in prison. At his sentencing, Crow explained that national security is subject to a wide range of definitions, a factor that makes all the more essential a painstaking approach to the definition of national security in any given instance. Crow was sentenced to serve 6 months in prison and remain on unsupervised probation for another 2 years. The judge at sentencing said, "In acknowledging your guilt, you have made no effort as you very well might have, to place the primary blame on others who initiated and who approved the undertaking. A wholly improper illegal task was assigned to you by higher authority, and you carried it out because of a combination of loyalty and I believe a degree of vanity, thereby compromising your obligations as a lawyer and a public servant. Crowe, who cooperated with the Watergate prosecutors and never bargained for leniency, served only 4.5 months of his sentence. The Washington State Supreme Court disbarred Crowe in 1975, although he successfully petitioned to be reinstated in 1980 and became partner in the Seattle law firm Crowe and Leonard. Crowe then spent the rest of his years supporting legal ethics education and writing and lecturing on the topic of integrity before his passing on January 18, 2020. Writing for the New York Times in 2007, he stated, "I finally realized what had gone wrong in the Nixon White House was a meltdown in personal integrity. Without it, we failed to understand the constitutional limits of presidential power and comply with statutory law." So now we have a couple of discussion questions for you. So how was ethical fating a part of Eigil Crowe's eventual journey to prison?
Well, he carried out the act.
Yeah, and what do you think caused him to carry out the act? Because ultimately he admitted he knew it was illegal.
Because he done it, and I think because he was appointed to that position, it influenced why he did it. If he didn't do it, was he gonna lose his job, or, discredit his
the job security of an appointed position? I think you're absolutely right. That would motivate him to act that way.
And I think when you read into the briefing, national security, and at that time, what was going on, even in today, national security is used to justify almost any action, because whether it's looking at natural resources or health issues or war, at that point, national security is like, okay, we got to do this. So there are no rules.
I agree with Joey on that. National security, that was the out.
Yeah. And that's what the Pentagon Papers were. Basically, they had done a study and showed that we were losing in the Vietnam War, and Ellsberg leaked those, and it was hurting the Nixon administration. So I think ultimately, as we know, Nixon got caught up in the Watergate scandal too. But in order to protect his own pride, he presented it as a national security issue to his people underneath him. And due to his position and his power, they looked at it as that without looking at any ethical implications for it.
I think there's probably also like a factor of an opportunity to advance, by doing favors and maybe sliding things through.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it as well. That wanting to advance and also wanting to please your superior by not questioning their motive either. All right, so we'll take our next question. At the time the decision was made, what factors caused the morality of the decision to break down into the office of Ellsberg, caused the decision to break into the office of Ellsberg psychiatrist to fade from view? I think we touched on a little bit earlier in our first question.
Well, they broke it down into professional process instead of a moral act or immoral action.
Well, and I think they were specifically trying to discredit that Ellsberg specifically because they were doing things that were discrediting of themselves. So, hey, let me throw some rocks at him. So everybody look over there at him and find out his what's the word? His credibility. Well, and not even his credibility, his mental health. Like at that time, the time frame of that mental health, if you were diagnosed with anything back in those days, then, oh God, if you're diagnosed with this, or this, then that was a reason to discredit you, period. And you were probably looked at, some certain kind of way. And I think that you got to look at the timing of all of those pieces too.
I think it's really interesting that they went so far as to like break in there to expose whatever mental health factors might be at play, but didn't make anything up, you know? So like maybe in their minds they're like, well, I'm just shedding light on what is the truth versus, you know, throwing them under the bus entirely. You know, like I could see how some of that rationalization would happen, you know.
And it's funny you say it that way, because I look at how politics have unfolded now, and now even through media, as biased as some may be, you just throw out innuendo. Well, I'm just asking questions. Well, again, and what we've learned through human psychology is you can immediately get someone to look this way and throw something this way.
Yep. And I mean, I think too that plays into where we're at now with Russia. You know, him controlling the media and the things that are looking like to the people that reside in Russia are much different than everybody else's play on the media, you know. So.
And if I had to guess, there were probably several other smaller, less impactful, little questionably ethical things, you know, that led up to it being in this state. Like it was probably slow growing to get to this level of legal action.
Yeah, because and when we present that case study, we present like a really focused on that one little thing. But yeah, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure there were a lot of steps that led into that. Not just, you know, they come in one day and said, "Hey, we're going to break into this guy's psychiatrist office to try to discredit him." So.
You know, today and probably back, you know, even back then, there were think tanks that they could have leaned on the strategy on how you approach something like this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there was think tanks conversations that were happening, and they knew if they did find or made something up, like she mentioned, and put it out there, they were going to also have to, that doctor or whatever would have then been called in to, you know what I'm saying? And then that would have been a discredit of his work and what his findings truly were. So they didn't want to drag anybody else, I think, in, because then that would have been more opportunity for the truth to come out had they done the other.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move on to our final question. This is just kind of an overarching question. So how might one guard against ethical fading in a high pressure work environment?
Rely on your policies and procedures that are in place.
Yeah, and I think that's a good one.
It sounds like also, it reminds me of that saying, you know, like stand for nothing and you'll fall for everything. You know, I think that it sounds like in this case, he was giving into the pressure, even though he knew it was wrong, you know? So I think, you know, like standing by your morals and letting those guide you and, you know, reflecting, kind of doing that self-check real quick, like, is this right? You know?
You attend trainings like this. have a discussion about it.
I think one of the issues with, especially that we deal with on a daily basis, is situational truth.
Uh-oh.
Certain values.
You're cutting in and out on us, Robert.
Well, mic's on and I'm in my office, so I don't know what's going on there. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. People grow up and they grow through their professional lives and establish personal values. Then and I agree with Marcia wholeheartedly. Once your group establishes norms and values for your group, it's important to stay with those policies, stay with those procedures, evaluate things on that level, because ethics becomes situational when you use your personal experience to evaluate and to judge situations. So it's very, very important in our day-to-day to make sure that we're not letting our personal influences affect what we distribute to all of you.
I would challenge that a bit, Robert, because when it comes to like, and I think the previous training that we had, we got into like the discussions of morals and ethics and how your morals inform your ethics. And, brought up some of the, and in this case, like how what you believe and how you approach it is inherent to how you're going to approach your job and understanding the ethics behind a specific position. So on the last training, I was like, how do you balance that morals and ethics when take for religious cases, for example, and that religious freedom or religious oppression or lack thereof, that's the foundation of someone's morals. But then how does that influence how they ethically approach themselves? And then the Kim Carpenter out of Illinois, the county clerk who refused to sign off on a marriage certificate for a same-sex couple, was just found guilty and is going to be in prison. So, her ethically, she should have carried that through because that was the law, but her morals undermined that. She said, well, I can't do that because morally I'm obligated to believe this, not ethically follow my job's law.
This is Denise Holloway Fox. I'm the clerk of court. And as an attorney, we are obviously bound by rules of ethics that encompass everything we do. And just to follow up on what you were saying, Joey, that, we have those that literally, if we don't follow this ethical mandate that's put out by the state bar, we lose our job. We lose our ability to have a job. At the same time, we all have our own morals and also the mores of the society in which one lives that they have to be juggled. And as doing this job for 20 plus years, the one thing that I've found that helps guide me is to have someone that understands exactly where you are, that you can run it by and just take that moment to say it out loud to determine if you're on the right track. But it's very, very important that it be someone that knows where you are. In my case, another lawyer that has basically the same views that I do. My mama, she's going to fall to, well, morally, you shouldn't do that. Where a judge might say, well, you have to do that. So it's take that step and say the words out loud to somebody else has always helped me figure out where I need to go.
Hey,
this is Sis Cave.
Okay.
Hey, to answer the question about guarding against ethical fading, I think one of the things that I try to do is to put myself in the opposite side. So like in the situation where the guy was getting his medical records looked at by unauthorized people, how would I feel if I were the person that was happening to? That may bring out another way of looking at, well, this is unethical. I may be in my rights as far as the government's concerned, but how would I feel if someone had done that to me? Same situation with the cars, the Pinto, where people were exploding from the gas explosions, the gas tank explosions. Then, how would I feel if that were my family member, my loved one that was killed in that? So it becomes more of a putting yourself in someone else's shoes to kind of figure out, is this something that's ethical or not? Just kind of helps as a barometer, I guess. Thanks.
Go ahead, Joey.
Could ethical fading, getting to that point also in this case of the case study that was provided and in general also be a result of it's only illegal if you get caught, or to the point of I'm only doing it because the context of which we're justifying raiding someone's office for national security is that it is legal. So it's only until someone catches you and say, well, there's issue with that you then ingrain that fading of your ethics.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. All right, Eden, do you have something to add to the conversation?
I was just going to answer the question as far as how might one guard against ethical fading. For me, I have to think about if there was a scenario where I was feeling pressured or, something unethical had arisen. For me, I have to think about I work for this organization. However, I'm held to an entirely different set of standards from, the IIA. And so for me, I think it would always, and for other people, is you have to think about, well, this is just my job, but in the long run, like it's going to affect you personally. You know, it's going to affect you if you wanted to go out and get a job somewhere else, and that's going to tackle. And is that worth it? You know, is some decision made, or, you know, from someone else who potentially is going to change? You know, if, you know, we work in a very high political environment, and if you have a, you know, someone that's seat's going to change every 4 years, every 2 years, is it really worth me and my career, losing my career, who's, you know, it's going to be a little bit more lengthier in the type of work that I'm doing versus them. So I don't ever put that before me. So that's sort of how I guard against that, is just, you know, put yourself and your career first.
I think that's a really valid point about the level of what's happening to you as far as ethical fading. For example, if you ask anybody in this room, this virtual room, if they ethical fade, they would have to think a minute. But if you watch them downtown in a 20 mile an hour speed limit, how many of them adhere to that, including myself, I would probably say, yeah, I probably ethical fade a little bit. So yeah, it's more challenging as you go up to the higher levels of thought.
I agree with you, Robert. As someone who almost got ran over crossing the road this morning to Ginger Lynn, I can speak from personal experience about the importance of having your own. You know, you talk about the Cherokee values, and I don't like to call anything core values. I think it's just common values that we all in our own little tribe of program work or teams or whatever. That there has to be a foundational set of values. And I, for one, most of you may know this, actually walked away from a 6-figure job because I wasn't about to, you know, compromise my integrity. Not everybody can do that or is willing to do that, but that's how strong mine are. And I just say it also goes to your upbringing and how you were taught, what you embraced, what you are loyal to as far as, you know, your caregivers. If you don't have that, it's a more slippery slope. But I think it goes back to the very beginning of, you know, your development, is how you were taught and how strongly those are modeled for you. Clearly, in this instance with the video, the higher ups didn't have that kind of, they weren't modeling it, but they were given permission. Now, whether you take it or not is going to be up to you and your set of values and how strong they are.
Jennifer, do you have something to add?
Yeah, just to kind of address what Juanita was saying, is I definitely agree with that, but I also think that there is a role that that the culture of the business is very responsible for, and I think that's what's controllable. You know, by cultivating a level of responsibility and communicating that to employees, I think a business can shape somebody who may not previously have those expectations set for themselves.
And I agree with that. I think the way that, and I understand what you're saying, Juanita, but the other piece too is if you go into a room of people that you don't know, everyone's ethics are different than the other person's. And so, but when you're talking about an organization, we create and model, we model or create what we want to have. And so, and yeah, every day, like, people are dealt with, you know, ethical things that they got to do or not do in regards to their personal beliefs. But at the end of the day, whenever it's organizational and then it's pushed down your, you know, pushed down to you and you've got to make a decision, then yes, your part is important on how you're raised and what you were brought up in. But the person next to me might not have any ethics. They might not have ever been brought up in it, and they wouldn't have any issue with doing whatever. So, you know, but you got to create that with the organization.
We're in training. We've got a management track, and most of you are in that little information thing with Jenny and Vanita. But the end of that management track is going to be more toward leadership, and it's called, well, you can't see it. It's called tribal leadership, and it talks about that very thing. But I think we have to be mindful that not everyone's going to adhere to the groups, and that it's what it talks about, the levels of where your tribe is, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. 1 being life sucks and I don't give a crap, and then better and better until level 5, and which is not easy to sustain and really nearly impossible. But you stay in 4 and 5 and it's pretty cool, and you have to regroup sometimes, but you got to check in with your folks and just not assume that because you're walking the talk and the people closest to you are walking the talk that everybody is. Because I've heard it so much in HR, you know, somebody's, you know, our organization's servant leadership or organization is this, and their employees are saying, no, they're not. But, you know, so you have that, and you have to check in with your people to make sure everybody's singing the same song. Otherwise, you're just kidding yourself and you're thinking, yeah, because I am. You do have those folks, and it's okay. And it takes time. And I think I get frustrated because of the 4-year administrations, whatever that is, comes in and expects instant change. If you don't get your people in line within the year, then, you know, you're not a leader. That's not true. If you grow your leadership amongst your people, it takes time. It takes buy-in. And sometimes you got to say, you know what, you don't fit in this program. We need to put you where you're going to be happier. And I think we have to admit that happens too, and needs to happen, because you can't let one person drag everybody down, and they can and they do.
And I think we've had some good discussion here. We'll move into our takeaways, and we're going to give you three ways that you can help to avoid ethical fading, and I think we've actually touched on them in our conversation. So the 3 ways how to avoid ethical fading. 1 is to slow down. For important ethical decisions, you need to slow down and think reflectively in order to see the problem more clearly and from different perspectives. And I think taking that time to slow down before you're in that situation is a really good idea.
Yeah.
The next one is to remind and reframe. So providing cues at critical points in a decision-making progress can increase the salience of the ethical dimensions of a problem and keep them in focus. Reframing a problem by starting with the ethical implications first rather than the financial or productivity imperatives can ensure that ethics do not fade from view. An example would be we react to products more favorably when they're described positively. So would you rather eat hamburger that states 75% lean beef or 25% fat?
I hear the word fat and it's like, that's true. That's funny, but it's true.
Then the final way to avoid ethical fading is to avoid euphemisms. So is it cooking the books or creative accounting, firing or downsizing, collateral damage or civilian deaths? Be aware that when euphemisms creep into language, they allow the ethical implications to subtly slip from view.
Yeah.
So those are our 3 ways to avoid ethical fading. Our final slide is just the references for our presentation. Does anyone have any questions or comments for us?
I think I just comment that this is a good training and really a unique one. I expected to be really bored and have my coffee on hand, you know, with extra caffeine, but this was really good, and I like the use of real life situations and some of the lessons gleaned from that. So good job.
Yeah.
Michael, you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed the training, and the previous slide where you had the 3 ways to avoid it. The whole time during the discussion, I'm thinking about all these euphemisms that I could, you know, the ends justify the means, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain over there. There's all kinds of euphemisms that just basically speak to, you know, people rationalizing their decision. Really is what you're doing, is you're just saying, I'm doing this because it's national security, or because it's more important that I get this done quickly than follow policy, or whatever the choices that you make. So thank you. I appreciate this training.
All right. Denise, do you have a comment?
Yes, I wanted to say that I've been to more ethical trainings and CLEs than I can possibly count. And this truly has been one of the best that I've participated in. And with y'all's permission, I would like to send this to the state bar. And first of all, ask that I be given an hour CLE credit for ethics. And then secondly, if that's approved, would y'all be willing to do this for the local attorneys?
I think we would be fine with that. What you can do is just send us an email after we're done,
Sure.
and we'll get the information to you and stuff like that. But we really do appreciate that.
I've enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Go ahead, Joey.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the training as well. And you know, going back to the first one y'all had, I don't know if at the beginning of late last year, you know, these are very informative, and these are the kind of trainings that you know, everybody across our tribal government network should be taking place in. And you know, for conversation, it's good that there are probably fewer people. I did want to hit on one thing that in that last slide about like slowing down and really assessing your decision making and your actions, and then pairing that with something that Eden said about, you know, having you know, looking out for your job for the long term, and in those two, like, you know, I'm looking out for my job, so my decisions are going to be, you know, slower to be made when you know you've got 30 years ahead of you. But then for an elected official and appointee, knowing you're operating on a term time, you know, I can see how that recommendation to slow down is very pertinent, because in my line of work, when someone says, "What are you in a hurry for? What's the rush?" I'm like, because I might not have a job next September, so I got to get stuff done. And so it's one of those things that, yeah, it's good to have that recommendation at the forefront of particularly elected officials and appointees, how they operate, because, you know, and again, it, like Eden said, folks are subject to politics at all levels, and I think it's been reduced over the years. And so, you know, trying to again change the culture and the mindset of how we operate, and having trainings like this be available and in an hour, very important. We got a very busy schedule, so I can't thank you enough for covering so much and succinctly in a short period of time.
Yeah, and I'll say this too, when we say slow down too, it's not necessarily, you know, we mean take a week or a month or an hour. It could be 30 seconds, but even 30 seconds could be enough to make a difference. So
I was going to say, you got 15 seconds. That's what I give you.
And I'd also like to mention too, our office, of course, it is Ethics Awareness Month, and that's one of the reasons we're putting on this training, but we're also going to start offering trainings quarterly. So we'll probably be sending out another one again here in 2 months or so. So another opportunity for a training on a different topic. Jennifer, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, hi. I was just kind of wanting to contribute. I'm definitely a big believer of priming, and I think one thing that's helpful is encouraging discussion about ethics, so people do know the expectations and can be held to that accountability, you know, in cultivating that programmatic culture. I think, you know, out of sight, out of mind, right? So like if we're talking about ethics and people are getting a clear, defined expectation, I think that's helpful to empower them to be able to ask the questions and, you know, analyze it within their own actions and within others.
Don, can I make one more comment?
Yeah.
This comes from trainings experience. We have an issue with leadership and management sending their employees to us to be fixed, and that's not gonna do it. You know, we can give them all the training in the world, but unless it's modeled and their management leadership knows what kind of training they've had, and they will help them practice it and stick with it, all we can do is just expose them to it. So I think it's a real important message for people in leadership. Know what your people are getting trained in, know how they're making that a part of their work habits, and know that we can't fix them. So it's not something that happens right away.
Yeah, those are very good points. Stephen, I know you had your hand up.
Oh, hi, thanks. Yeah, a real quick question, and maybe that's some of that selective, but I saw on the previous, if we could see the previous slide, because I took note, slow down, no euphemisms, but I know there were 3 things on that slide.
Yeah.
What was the third one? Did I miss it? I somehow missed the third one. Slow down.
No,
remind and reframe. Okay, yeah, that was the
remind and
reframe. So we're reminding ourselves. And then I was going to say too, I think like just another thing to think about too is transparency, right? Like there's been studies that show even like the sweetest of children, when they think nobody's around looking, they tend to cheat more often. And like they did an experiment where they put like a stuffed toy in the room, and when the stuffed toy was in the room, they were less likely to cheat. So it's, it doesn't take a whole lot of transparency and oversight to get us to act right. If we think somebody's looking, we tend to act right. Not that, I'm not recommending we have, surveillance, but rather, that.
What you got going on, Tippo?
When your stuff's available for people for review, or you think somebody, like every time I write an email, I assume like Doug Chase is going to read every one of them. He's like, so like I write emails in that sense.
Ooh, Tippo's got something to hide.
All right, Marcia, I think you were the final one.
I just want to kind of add to what Joey and Eden were both saying, and I get it to a degree, I think, but the other piece too, in regards to like Juanita's comments, is, I know there's, the long-term planning personally that people got to look at when they're making those kinds of decisions. But the other piece is the position that you're in at any time, whatever that is, you're also choosing to be there. And so for an elected official or somebody that takes an appointed position, they're choosing to go in that position with the knowing that they may be not there in 2 years or 4 years, and that's the reality. But the other piece of that is, if you're using your education and the tools that you've done, the opportunities will come to you no matter where you are, whether you're in that position or somewhere else after that time. So that's all I got. But the training was great. Thank you all.
Oh, yeah, and just before we let you go here, we want to thank you all for coming today. Tashina and myself really appreciate it. We really appreciate your comments and your participation in the conversation. It makes the training better for us as well. Like I said, it's Ethics Awareness Month, and we're glad that you took the time to be with us and that you want to keep ethics in the forefront of your mind. And if you have any questions or anything after we're done today, feel free to call us, send us an email, whatever, and we'll be more than happy to answer your questions or provide you with anything you may need. All right. Thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.